Evil West is a power fantasy action game where you'll be slaying demons and vampires in some of the most over-the-top video game combat we've seen in a while. But it's not always as straightforward as it looks. With a bevy of guns at your disposal and a slew of ways to steam punch your enemies into oblivion, it can sometimes be a lot to take in. But don't fret, we've compiled a list of tips and tricks to make sure you're the rootinest, tootinest vampire hunter in the Old West. The Cannonball attack sees Jesse flinging an enemy into the air and then punching them into something like a conveniently placed wall of spikes or a stack of dynamite for big damage. But depending on the enemy, it won't always work. Of course, the easiest way to be sure you're successful is to get the enemy squared up and as close to the object as you can. Remember, smaller enemies travel further, where bigger enemies will need to be much closer. You'll know you're lined up correctly when the object shows the weak point circles. Spikes and dynamite aren't the only reasons to fling your enemies around. They can also be slammed into other enemies for damage and momentary stuns, and they can even be ejected from the arenas by punching them off the map. Always keep moving in combat. Evil West is not a straightforward third-person shooter, even if it looks that way at first. Much like Bayonetta or the Devil May Cry series, you're meant to be constantly moving, shooting, and utilizing your different melee attacks. Unlike those games, however, Evil West doesn't have a style point system. Your only goal is to kill and stay alive. And the best way to do that is to stay on the move. Always do your best to keep your enemies in front of you. Unlike combat in something like the Arkham games, Jesse isn't great at countering attacks from off-screen enemies. While there will be an arrow on your HUD telling you where an attack might be coming from, there aren't a ton of ways to defend against back or side attacks, save for a quick dodge. It's best to keep the enemies in Jesse's sight, that way you can utilize your zapper counters, attack interruptions, and guns to keep the enemies from landing too many hits on you. When overwhelmed, try and prioritize enemies that are giving you the most trouble. For example, anytime the demons that drop the little yellow exploding pods are on the map, it's always smart to take them out as fast as you can. Those little pods can drain your health quickly, making it extra dangerous to try to fight hordes of enemies while avoiding those projectiles. Also, flying enemies are a nuisance that die quickly to your rifle. Basically, anytime any enemy shows their weak points, signified by the little circles, just shoot them down. It'll likely kill smaller enemies in one hit, and they'll usually drop health pods. Finishing moves don't just look awesome, they also reward you with health pods and energy for your zapper. So if you see a staggered enemy glowing, rush over to give it the full Doom Guy treatment. Jesse has a kick that will interrupt enemies before certain attacks. When an enemy glows like this, which just so happens to be incredibly similar to the finishing move animation, don't ask me why, though it absolutely isn't the same, you can use a kick to stagger the enemy for you to get away or land some extra blows. The flash, however, only lasts for just a moment, giving you barely any time to perform the kick. However, you'll learn that the flash isn't the entire window in which you can interrupt the attack. It's only there to indicate when the move is actually happening. If you get the kick off before the enemy does his attack, most of the time, it will still interrupt them. And that's it for now. Make sure to sound off in the comments below if you'll be jumping into Evil West. And of course, for everything else video games, stick with IGN.